Well, good afternoon, everyone. And here we are for another GemCap Academy. It's my pleasure this afternoon to introduce Lorcan Murphy, Managing Director of Accolin, a fund service that we here at GemCap have used now for a good number of years, and I've enjoyed working with you, Lorcan. Good afternoon, Lorcan. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. A sunny
Good.
day in Dublin.
Well, it
which
must be
doesn't happen too often.
it's cold and grey here, I'm afraid, here in the UK. Look, and thanks very much for joining me this afternoon. For our viewer, would you just introduce Accolin and who you are and what you do?
Sure. So Accolin provide fund distribution support services. So we support the fund sales team, everything from hosting distribution agreements with all the intermediaries across Europe, to fund registration, to Swiss legal representative, local agents, data services, as well as one of our best sellers these days is a Brexit busting EU tied agency service. So where we help managers market in the EU.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like you do everything.
Well, what we don't do is we're not a manco. We don't manage any assets. We're not an investment manager, obviously, and we don't do the selling. We're
Right.
fund distribution support services. So we support the people who do the selling.
Okay, so that touches on sort of the plumbing, and I talk about plumbing a lot with investment managers, and distribution, as you said at the top of that, it really is a key element of everything we do. It's a key driver, but plumbing also is very, very important. But when an investment manager, be it in the US or in Asia or wherever, is looking at Europe, what are the key elements that they should be looking at when they want to come into that market from your point of view, when it comes in regard to the plumbing itself?
Yeah, and I think plumbing is a great way to think of it. The generation of the investment returns, passive or active returns, is a differentiator. Getting out there and making sales happen, getting in front of investors, helping them understand what the product is and closing the deal, that's a differentiator. But then there's a whole lot of things that need to happen between that, and we focus on the distribution side of that, so the distribution plumbing. We break it down into two different strands. One is the product being set up for sale, and the other is the sales team being regulated and set up. So examples of things that we do to help the product. So you've got your product, it's a great performing fund, you've got your salesperson wants to go out there. Now, how do you make it all happen? So with respect to the product side of things, that would be classically product registration. So you register the fund in a couple of jurisdictions. Marketing materials, making sure the marketing materials aren't, just perfect and legal and everything, but they get to the right person at the right time. So marketing material distribution, Prips Kids and other fun things like that. Yeah, exactly. Getting to the platforms at the right, so that the people who require them have them in front of them. Data.
So you distribute those. So when it comes to kids and
absolutely. Yeah. I'll explain more about that in a second when I talk about distribution network management. But yeah. So data. So the investors buy because they understand what they're buying. To do that, they need to have the data that they need to consume in front of them. It needs to be accurate and timely, and that's easier said than done. There's a lot of work involved in that. The legal agreements themselves, these need to be the distribution agreements for the various platforms and intermediaries, and these need to be set up and working well. And then you need to, once you have all that in place, you need to follow up with due diligence and product distribution compliance. So the board of directors of the fund are going to are under pressure to demonstrate not only that agreements are in place, but that there is control on the activity of distribution, ultimately by the board of directors, but through probably the investment manager's sales team.
Okay, just touching on something there, because I know you and I have had a number of conversations over the last, I don't know how many years now, with regard to the fallout from MiFID and obviously and post Brexit. Here we are in a situation where fund managers based here in the UK going into Europe is a bit of a no-no, flying in, flying out, needing MiFID registration. What's the situation post Brexit for you? MiFID world for US managers and Asian managers going into Europe. How do you see it? And is there a solution?
That's a very nice segue. So I was saying there's two strands. So the first strand is the product, and you're talking about the second strand. So that's the regulation around the activity of marketing. So say you have the product all perfectly set up, you still need to ensure that the activity of marketing is correctly carried out. The UK has a very benevolent and easy to access process around marketing to professional investors and equivalents, for instance, for American investors, American investment managers. The Switzerland has improved its system lately. So previously, in nearly every instance, you would need to utilize a Swiss legal representative, which Acolin is one, and this is your the entity that the regulator looks to first to ensure that the activity of marketing is carried out correctly. So you're based anywhere in the world, you appoint a Swiss legal representative, and FINMA, the Swiss regulator, looks to the legal representative to say, have you checked that everything is all the checks and balances are correct? That's actually got a little more relaxed, and they've recognized that if a regulated asset manager is communicating with professional investors, with other regulated entities, that there's that the level of regulation can be lighter. So there is you're able to market in Switzerland now with less regulatory
and how does that look? What sort of change is it? What is that? Documentation, registration? What actually has changed?
It's registration with FINMA. So if you want to market, if your fund is going to be marketed to retail investors, either by you or by someone you're working through, then you need to be.
You mean man on the street when we talk about retail here?
Yeah, but say you talk to a large Swiss private bank who themselves markets directly to the man on the street, then the Swiss private bank will say to you, you need to have your fund registered for that activity. Even though you yourself may not have been to Switzerland for 5 years, the fund itself has been going all the way down to retail, and therefore you need to register it for non-qualified investors. But say you're targeting only family offices or private banks for their own fund of funds or pension funds or something like this.
So discretionary assets.
So if the people, the end users are regulated entities, then you don't need to register, you just need to notify that you're behaving in that manner. So anyway, that's Switzerland's got it easier. The EU hasn't. So
surprise.
Yeah. So the EU probably has I don't know if it's got tougher or just got clearer on what is required. And given that a lot of people base their EU marketing from within the UK prior to the implementation of Brexit, and utilize the FCA as the lead regulator, that now doesn't allow you to market into the 27 countries of the EU. So you need some form of presence in the EU, and your choices basically are don't market, and some version of very restrictive reverse solicitation. So that's kind of don't market. The second option is set up your own MiFID II entity that has its authority. Some people, if you're of a certain scale, if you're of certain substance in the EU, that makes sense. You may have that already, or you may be able to add that without too much extra cost. But if you're an organization that doesn't have that level of substance in the EU, you might be huge in other parts of the world, but you don't have that substance in the EU, then you can utilize a tied agent, and that's a service we provide. And basically what it means is that we are overseeing the activity of marketing by individuals who are conducting that marketing on behalf of you.
Right, okay. It's one of the expressions I often use, and I think within GemCap, everyone's got quite bored with this explanation, but I talk about putting a fund in a shop window.
Yes.
And if you put it in a shop window, and people have talked about, if you build it, they will come. That's a sort of another argument. But you put it in a shop window, you've got to get people, and this is where third-party marketers are very, very important. So you talk about the actual people doing the selling of the fund. They're the ones who sort of push the investors past the window and have a look in. But once they push them through the shop door, they've got to be able to buy the product. And if the plumbing's not in place, so if you haven't got the contracts in place, and you haven't got, in fact, if you haven't got the legal agreement in place to actually buy the fund, then you've got a problem. I guess you guys are the sort of shopkeepers, really, in that analogy. I'm not going to say this like open all hours, which is British sitcom, but I presume you would pride yourselves as a business as someone that basically makes sure that from the beginning to the end of that line, that chain, that you make sure it's all working and is in place.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And I think, well, literally people refer to fund supermarkets, and it is that concept of having one place where you can have access to multiple products. If you are a wealth manager, if you are a family office, lots of other types of investors, you want to have effectively whole of market. So you want to see a large range of funds for every strategy that you're thinking about. And if someone comes to you to tell you about how amazing their product is, and that product isn't already loaded onto the system that you're doing your analysis on, and loaded means there's a legal agreement in place because the people running the system need to cover themselves in terms of making sure that they're comfortable with the product. And that's exactly what the distribution agreement covers. If the data isn't loaded and correct and accurate and timely, then and the due diligence isn't in place, and if there isn't a process for paying trail fees, if that's appropriate in the market in question, then that product isn't available. And it could be the best product, but you've just wasted that investor's time. They've left the coffee in Zurich with you thinking that's a great product. They've gone back to their office, they've typed the ISIN in, and it has not come up, and they've gone, next.
Yeah, exactly. So that leads very nicely into my next point, really, and it's all about the mistakes, and what the mistakes that fund managers, asset managers, investment managers make when they come into Europe from overseas. What do you see are the biggest mistakes they make?
Yeah, and I think we just touched on one, which is this: building a product is expensive, time consuming, getting a track record, getting a scale in the product. And these are all eminently achievable, but they're big investments. And to do all of that, and then to go out to the market without understanding the dynamic of the buyer and the challenges the buyer has. So the investment allocator that you're speaking to has to present your product to an investment committee, and they will have to fill out operational due diligence questionnaires, and as well as investment due diligence. So the investment proposition is fabulous, but the operational due diligence from the investor's perspective doesn't work. For instance, the fund isn't loaded on the system, or it doesn't meet whatever criteria. Then either that person isn't going to bring it forward, or that person will, and they'll have a very bad meeting when someone senior says, "Oh, by the way, I tapped it in, it didn't pop up." So preparing and understanding the investors and preparing having the support for the distribution for your great investment strategy is a key way that people mess up. And my history with Ackland's been around 15 years. I've been there for 11, and I was involved in some third-party marketing at the start. We had a relationship with a gold fund, and we got a very big ticket into a Swiss private bank, and over 12 months later, the distribution agreement wasn't in place. The market had changed. Gold was no longer flavor of the month, and the investment allocator, who had spent time and effort, was very, very frustrated and disappointed. So, going out there and trying to gather excitement without having a feasible plan for how you're going to allow someone into the fund is a waste of everyone's time and money. And that's a big mistake that happens.
Yeah, you've got to have your ducks lined up before you go to market. It's absolutely critical.
And sorry, what I say to people is, you don't have to spend all this money loading up all these agreements, trying to figure out where it's going to come from before you've had those conversations. But you do, as a minimum, need to have a feasible solution sorted out. And Ackland can help you with that. We can say, okay, to the extent you get demand, tell us where it's coming from, and we can put the agreements in place fast. As long as you can work fast, we can work fast. If there's real demand, everyone works fast. And so we can catch up with the ODD, IDD process so that the money can hit the fund in a reasonable time frame.
Now, you've been in Ackland for,
sorry, there's a second mistake. There's a second mistake that people make.
Oh, is there?
So not setting things up correctly, I'd say, is a mistake. But the other mistake that people make is spreading themselves too thin. Right. So looking at multiple segments, multiple countries, and saying,
well, I was going to say, what are the key markets? What are those key markets you think? Because it's easy when you're sitting in California or sitting in Kyoto and you're going, right, we need to go to Europe.
Yeah.
And even post-Brexit, people look at the UK as part of Europe, but in reality, we all know there's 27 different countries with 27 different ideas of how to deal with. What do you think are the key markets? And going back to your point there about spreading themselves too thinly, what would you see as a key area that people should be looking at? Would it be 1, 2, 3? Well, how many and which markets would they be?
Yeah. So the worst way to do it is to run around Europe and kind of do a whistle-stop tour and have some interest from a Nordic sovereign wealth, some interest from a French insurance company, a little bit of interest from private wealth in Germany and a family office in Switzerland. And you're going, so what do I do with this now? How do I now move forward? So it's focusing on finding a market, which we'll come to in a second, focusing on that market, digging in and building the trust and understanding on your side and their side of them, of you by them, and vice versa. So in terms of markets, the from a top-down perspective, UK, Switzerland, Germany is the order in terms of the assets. France looks big, but it has a lot of money market funds included. Banks sold money market funds, you got to strip them out. You have some, again, big looking markets from an institutional perspective in the Nordics, but they're very specific, very small number of large tickets, which is great if that's what you're into.
But so, a lot of ESG around there as well. So you've got to have
you've got to have something that connects. And Italy appears to have assets, but there's a small number of large brokerage houses who strangle hold that market, and unless you go in against them, you're not going to win that battle. So you really need to go in and talk to them. So it's a different sort of sale. The first thing I would say to someone is you typically have a fund already, you have a fund business already. What is that business? What's your culture? What's working for you? Who likes your product at the moment? Is it donuts to brokers in Miami? That's great. Then you might want to go to UK and Germany and get some people on the ground and buy some beer in Hamburg and, you know, cups of tea in England or whatever.
I'm on the next flight.
Yeah.
Beer
and
burgers.
you know, because your product, your culture, your marketing materials will all align with that. If you're donuts in Miami, why are you aiming for sovereign wealth in Norway? Vice versa, if you're dealing with a small number of institutional players in maybe Japan, then don't, you know, think that it's going to be easy, you know, flipping over to retail in Switzerland. So focus, leverage what got you this far already, and broadly, it's all here. It's Europe has every type of investor. There's lots of assets. There's lots of opportunity. Some of the best successes are you know, going a little different, focusing on Greece because you know someone from Greece, or focusing on the French market because you have a product that is in vogue in France. You know this, you figured that out, and yeah, you just focus on the French market and you raise a whole lot of fixed income assets. It happens, it really does.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. Funny enough, one of our managers is attacking Greece, but that's because they have a Greek heritage in their business.
There you go.
So,
Exactly.
yeah, I understand it. I was going to say, you know, in the 11 years you've been in acting, and clearly you've been in the, I'm not saying anything about your age, but you've clearly been in the industry a lot longer than 11 years. But in that
12.
time, there's been a lot of change. There's been a lot of developments, technological innovations, etc. Some good, some bad, some we'd rather not remember. But do you see big changes ahead, 2023, 24, that maybe you want to share with our viewer?
Yeah, so distribution is on a trajectory of change. In even back 5 years ago, but certainly back 10, 15 years ago, a lot of the regulations were around the investments and the administration, so custody, valuation, and correctly so, and have kind of run their course with that. You could argue ESG is an investment-related set of regulations, but you know, that whole area is probably as regulated as it can be. In the meantime, we've had a lot more people come to the market. The number of people invested every year increases. The assets that people are investing increases, and the complexity of the channels that go from the end investor to the product have increased. That complexity has increased, and regulators are obviously aware of that and are raising expectations around how investment managers view their business. Alongside that, investment managers themselves, the better managed investment managers have created a competitive advantage from understanding their distribution better. So what I mean by this is, imagine you don't come from the asset management world, you come from a totally different industry. You might expect that people in the asset management world would know who all the investors in a fund are. Well, nearly every case they don't. You're very lucky if you have 20 large pension funds on your fund register directly, and you kind of go, I know everything about this. But most likely you have omnibus accounts, you have layers of platforms that then have regional banks that then have wealth managers who account for individual investors. And you overlay that with sanctions, with obviously, you know, US investor restrictions. You think of it from an AML KYC perspective, you think of it from an ESG preference perspective, and the whole point of trying to make a product that is actually what the client wants and helping the client make those decisions. And you add all that up in a mix with big data and technology disruption and fintech. And at some point, we will be at a point where every asset manager knows every investor in their fund.
Do you honestly believe that? Do you
I honestly
believe
believe it. I said this to an American recently, and he said, of course, but you must have the tax identification number of every investor in the fund. And I still don't understand if that actually happens in America. But
I don't think it does, because they often. I've had this conversation with U.S. houses, and yeah, they rely on the Patriot Act. They don't rely. We talk about MiFID, and they go, no, you don't. We don't need to share anything. And
yeah.
This is 2023, and maybe by 2025 they might wake up to this. But
sorry, I'm not saying this is the end of this year. No, I'm saying this is a trajectory we're on. So right now, Ackland are working with a set of asset managers, helping them take data in from a range of sources. So you may have individual client accounts, maybe banks and stuff on your register. You have some omnibus accounts, and you have distribution agreements with these omnibus accounts, and they say, yeah, we'll give you a CSV file every month that tells you everything. And you have a relationship with someone else, and they say, we have a data tool, we can give you all that data. So a lot of the data is there, but what you actually need to do is you need to pull all this data in, sort it all out, understand it, and line it up in a way you can now do something with it. And so we call that insight, so that you actually line the data up. And there might be some dark pools or black spots, but you get most of the data, and you know, okay, 5% of my investment is coming from German wealth managers or something. And then the fun bit then is the foresight part of that module, where we say, okay, now that we know we've got it all chopped and diced beautifully, what do you want to know? So you want to know, let's start with profitability. So which of your sub funds and which of your share classes are the most profitable? Making some assumptions for allocation of costs. But now you're saying, wow, very interesting. Our retail share class are actually giving 50% of the AMC away, is actually making a lot of money, because we've got this volume and we've got the lower allocation of cost to that, whatever. That's the costing side. Then there's the propensity to buy. So you can say, okay, we are noting that there's Swiss wealth managers who buy our emerging market equity fund are being really receptive to our phone calls around emerging market bond funds, are actually investing. Here is a list, press a button, here's a list of all the clients who are invested via Swiss wealth managers in our emerging market equity fund. Timmy, you might want to call them up and see if they'd like to invest in the emerging market bond fund. So instead of a salesperson starting their day, their week, their month, just wonder who I'm going to call today. Here's actually a list of people who have a propensity, a greater than average propensity to buy into a product that has a greater payoff than other products. Why wouldn't you do that? People are doing that right now.
As an ex-fund sales guy, then that's music to my ears, because you've got a warm lead in effect. You're not doing a cold call.
People are doing that now. This is not so strange. And I bet if I knew more about other industries, I could have great examples of the pharmaceutical industry, or car salesmen or something.
Exactly. But if you own the data, you own everything, and that data is king. Absolutely critical to everything. And it is amazing that our industry has all this data flowing left, right, and center, but no one's really capturing it. No one's really analyzing it and utilizing it to a fact.
Well, I wouldn't say no one. I wouldn't say no one.
There's few.
It is. And I think it's been a long time coming. We are maybe 20% the way down the road. And there are absolutely people doing this. I've got to imagine the ETF world is ripe with this, albeit it's secondary market. It is another way of thinking about that. But in fast moving consumer investment products,
exactly.
There's a way of thinking about this.
Not the sleepy investment funds world, which is a little bit slow behind the times. But I appreciate what you've said, Dan, and it's encouraging to know that you feel that we are certainly down the road, or heading down that path, and we can see there's a path to better data management and utilization. I hope you're right as far as the provision of that data coming from the various sources. I am slightly cynical that some firms and some sectors will not be as open with their data as we would like, but we'll see.
So imagine a regulator mandated that customer level data suitably, protected must be shared up the line.
We had that to a certain extent, but we're talking about jurisdictions as well, cross-border jurisdictions, and I'm talking about the great big
inside
Atlantic.
the EU, outside the EU, Swiss privacy.
That's more challenging.
Yeah, it is more challenging. But if that information was universally available, that would not be the end of the story. You've still got to manage to pull the information in, collate it, do something innovative with it. So yeah, there's lots of work to do there, but we definitely see that being a large focus for investment managers.
Brilliant. Looking, we could talk all afternoon. I'm conscious of what you said at the top of the call, which is it's sunny outside. So I must allow you to go and enjoy that sunshine whilst it lasts. But looking, thank you so much for joining me today, and we really appreciate your insights. And I hope to God you're right in the future developments. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much.